Well, good morning to everybody this morning. Welcome our live stream audience as well. You know, there's lots of reasons we worship the Lord. That's a great lead in. Thank you, Ross and worship team. And, you know, as we get into Ecclesiastes, sometimes the passage doesn't maybe lean itself to sharing the most important message that we preach, the most important message that we believe. One of the reasons we can worship the Lord is because he took yours and my biggest problem and he provided a solution to it. That is the message of the Bible, is the gospel. That we had a death penalty hanging over our head. We had a righteousness issue that wasn't going to qualify us to get to heaven, no matter how many good works we tried to perform. And God provided the solution by sending his only begotten son to die for sins. But the message gets even better than that. Everyone knows that Jesus died for sins, but do you know that Jesus died for your sins? Every sin that you have committed, will ever commit, Jesus paid the penalty for that. And God accepted his sacrifice on your behalf by raising him from the dead, only asking us to respond by faith. Will you trust in God's solution to get you to heaven? Stop trusting in your own solution. Stop trusting in my own solutions. It's not about becoming more religious or about becoming more good. It's about trusting in God's solution to get you to heaven. So that's the good message. You're not going to hear a better message than that. You can't improve on that message of the gospel. That's truly good news. But we are going to teach another part of the Bible this morning. So turn with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 7. And Nate read the passages for us. And I know when he read verse 28, many of you probably felt sorry for me that I'm going to actually have to talk about that verse this morning in front of a mixed group. But we'll have fun, and we want to take it in context, obviously. So one of the things that we need to come into, those that have been in this study of Ecclesiastes, you know this, you've heard it, but you've slept a few times, so we need to be reminded. Those that might be coming in afresh this morning or have picked up here and there, Solomon believed in wisdom. He had no problem with wisdom. In fact, we know the scriptures say he was the wisest man who ever lived. Okay, so he didn't have a problem with wisdom. He valued wisdom, but he recognized wisdom's limitations. He didn't hold it up as a bulletproof vest that would deliver you from all of life's trials and adversities in life. He also recognized something else, and we'll kind of get into that this morning, that man, even when man says, yep, I'm bought in, wisdom's the way, that's the path I want to go on, that mankind has a problem consistently walking in wisdom. That's an issue that he recognizes. And then he also recognizes a very deceptive thing that many of us do, and that is we hold up things that are good, like wisdom is good, righteousness is good, right? All of these things are good, but we hold them up independently of a relationship with the Lord. We hold them up independently of walking by faith. We don't bring all of these things together in a daily, moment-by-moment trust. And so we hold up wisdom apart from the Lord, and Solomon's going to say that's not the path either. Although it seems like you're going after something good, it's going to fail you. And so this morning, as we get into, starting in verse 23, what we're going to see is Solomon is going to go back. He's going to repeat some things. I'm going to try to move through those quickly. I know how that's almost a cardinal sin, right? To repeat something that's already been said. I mean, it feels that way in our culture. It's like, just get me to something new. Sometimes he repeats it, though, because it's important. But we will try to move a little bit quickly. And what he's going to tell us, though, in verses 23 through 25 is he's going to give us his credentials. He's going to give us his methodology behind how he investigated this whole concept that he's communicating. And then when we get to verse 26 through 29, he's going to say, here's what I found. Let me tell you the conclusions of my investigations. Let me tell you what I found. In fact, when we get to verse 26, toward the end of the chapter there, he's going to use the word found or find like 7 times. Okay, so he's telling us his conclusions. What have I found? So that's what we're going to get into this morning, but we're going to first look at his methodology. Look at verses 23 through 24. He says, all this, I have proved by wisdom. I said I will be wise, but it was far from me. And as for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find out? Excuse me. So the word prove just means to put something to the test. going to kind of that the blue italicized words, to attempt to learn the true nature of something. So he is trying to attempt to learn the true nature. What we'll find here as we go further, the deep things of life, the bottom line meaning and purpose of life. This has kind of been his whole search in this book. And in this case, Solomon has tested his own conclusions by wisdom. Okay, he's taken the ability to intake knowledge and then skillfully apply it to certain situations. He's used all that together to really push the testing of these limits. In fact, you could say that Solomon did more of an investigative approach on the meaning of life than anyone who has ever lived. That's the whole point of what he's going to say in the next few verses. So we've got to understand, he's not making these comments half-heartedly. This isn't somebody at a bar that's had a little bit too much to drink and they've started waxing eloquent recording their words. This is a guy who devoted his life to this topic and is trying to share the outcome of what he's figured out. Remember, Solomon is probably an old man at this time. This is like grandpa sitting you down and saying, son, granddaughter, listen to me. Record this, take notes. I'm going to tell you what's important in life. Again, he used every drop of wisdom that he had to test this hypothesis. And what we're going to find is, even though he pursued it, he missed it. Okay, isn't that a great picture? I don't know, I've been laughing all week at this picture. So he said, I will be wise. Okay, so again, we see his desire to be wise. From the verbal aspect in the Hebrew, it's a continual, ongoing desire for wisdom. It wasn't like, oh, now I'm 85, let me try to be wise. This was his life pursuit. This is what he did. It was intentional. It was ongoing. He didn't just think about these things once in a while. This drove everything that he did in his life. This is what he's talking about here. And have you ever met an expert in a certain field? You know, I was kidding with Sean earlier this morning because I figured it's July 4th. He grilled. Sean is a great griller. Every time he tries to grill something, I'm like, guinea pig, dude. Call me up, bring me over, because he can grill. The guy's got a skill, right? He studies it. He looks at it. You know, you think of any hobby, collecting coins, antique cars. I think of George. Quilting, right? Scrapbooking, all of these kind of things where you talk to somebody that's their hobby. Ken with plants, right? And they know their stuff because they've studied it. They've invested in it. Wisdom was Solomon's hobby. This is what he's trying to tell us. This is what he devoted his time and attention to. But notice this, I will be wise, but what does the next phrase say in verse 23? But it was far from me. Wow, that's frustrating. Now that happens a lot too. The more you study a certain field, the more you realize what you don't know. You know, that happens too. So he recognizes that no matter how much effort he gave, he still recognized his lack of wisdom in many areas. He recognized that the pursuit of wisdom it's got limitations. It's not the ultimate shield against adversity. You know, that's why we looked at that last week. Many people pursue wisdom and righteousness and all these kind of things. And Solomon says, don't be overly wise. Don't be overly righteous. And it almost is like Solomon saying, don't be righteous. Don't be wise. But we looked at that last week. It's not what he's saying. He's saying, don't pursue those things thinking that those are going to insulate you from life's problems. Many times we pursue these things and it's severed or separate from a relationship with the Lord. And he's saying, don't do that. You're not going to find the answer to life doing things that way. And so the same thing for Solomon, you know, and really when you think about this statement, again, just a reminder who wrote this. This is the guy whom God says was the wisest man who ever lived, okay? That means, according to the accurate assessment of God the Creator, this man had more wisdom than any one of us. And you know what that tells me is if he recognizes that he pursued it wholeheartedly, but it was far from him. He just missed the finality of getting it all together. It ought to make us recognize our absolute desperate need for walking in the fear of the Lord. This need to have true biblical wisdom, which only comes from divine viewpoint, coupled with the Word of God, walking in dependence upon the Lord. All of those things have to come into play, and it ought to show us that just the pursuit of wisdom alone is not enough in life. Just that pursuit alone is not enough in life. And just the fact that he's saying this ought to put us on guard. If I knew Michael Jordan, and I don't, but if Michael Jordan came to me and said, there's this basketball player, no one's ever heard of him, he's on the streets of Chicago, he plays in the playgrounds, I could never beat him in one-on-one. Guess what I would realize by that statement too? I also could never beat him one-on-one. Because if Michael Jordan can't do it, I can't do it, right? If Solomon is telling us what he's figured it out, that's the whole point. Use his experience and adjust our thinking accordingly. And that's kind of the point here and why this statement is so incredible. He goes on to say, and as for that, which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? That and it in this sentence refer to wisdom. Okay, so he's talking about, as for wisdom, which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find wisdom out? Again, he's talking about wisdom with these pronouns. And then he says, really, that wisdom in its totality was far away. Again, it emphasized this long distance with a great deal of separation. It was exceedingly deep, the text tells us. And the idea is not right under the surface. Isn't that great? Like if you were treasure hunting and you just put the shovel in the ground like twice and there was your box. It never works that way, right? I mean, you've seen the movies. Like the guys are like in the hole, right? They've dug like an 8-foot hole and they still haven't gotten to it. So the idea is wisdom's the same way. It's not just turning a couple of spades. It's deep. It's phrased in the Hebrew, deep, deep, literally. It's just the word's used twice. And then third, it's hard to discover. Again, it emphasizes that obtaining it is very difficult. It answers that question, that question there in verse 24, who can find it out? The implication is no one can. No one can get their arms fully wrapped around this thing called wisdom. And so it really puts the pursuit of wisdom in perspective. Again, just pursuing that, it's good, but it's not a bulletproof vest for life. And this is what many people, we have trouble because we think, well, we're pursuing the Lord. Why does this thing happen to me? Why do I feel this way? Why is this relationship going this way? I'm trusting the Lord. I'm walking with the Lord. Why are these bad things happening to me? And oftentimes it's because we're pursuing wisdom. We don't have divine perspective that God indeed wants to use trials and adversity in our life. So wisdom doesn't insulate us from all of those things. Now in verse 25, he uses a word that we've seen a couple of times. It's this word applied. He says, I applied my heart to know, to search and seek out wisdom and the reason of things, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness. Now, this is a repeated statement from earlier in the book. Solomon's already really told us this, but let's really quickly move through this. When he says he applied his heart, the idea is that he pursued it from every angle. Okay, again, he's giving us his credentials. He's giving us this methodology. It's like when somebody gives you a statistic in our day. Oh man, I mean, who is blind on statistics when it comes to political arguments and the things that go on? I mean, anyone else just blind on statistics? I'm almost sick. I'm a math guy, and I'm almost sick of statistics, right? I'm almost just tired of statistics. Because what it makes you want to say, every time I see a statistic now, what's the question that we always ask? Where did you get that from? Who did you interview? What was your methodology? And still, to this day, in the 2016 presidential election, I don't know who was doing the statistics leading up to that. Right? Because Hillary, well, she's a runaway. She's going to win this. I mean, I went to bed early because I was like, oh, this is over. She's got it, and I'm going to wake up. I wake up, and I thought I was in an alternate reality. I'm like, Trump won? All the statistics, all the polling said he was going to lose. And so you've got this. So Solomon, I think, is anticipating, future generations be like, who's this dude? Why is this dude? Why should we listen to this guy? And so he's giving us this credentials. He's giving us this methodology. He's telling us again, the word applied literally means to surround or to encircle. And the idea is that he didn't just half-heartedly come to these conclusions. He devoted his life looking at this from every single angle, trying every different method to give us this conclusion on what he found to be true in life. What did he apply his heart to do? Again, this internal application? Well, he mentions three things. He says to know. And what does he want to know? We'll go back to verse 25. We'll have to jump down into the verse. But he wants to know wisdom and the reason of things. Okay, these three things that he wants to do with his heart, it's to gain more insight into wisdom and the reason of things. And so when we look at knowing, it's talking about gathering information, intaking information. The word reason that's used here has been used in the book before. It just means the bottom line, the very bottom line, the sum of all things. Okay, the main point, you could say. That's what the word reason. So he set his heart to know. He applied it. He encircled. He looked at it from every angle to try to learn these things. And so Solomon was the great observer. He was, think in your mind, he's investigating. He's got his magnifying glass and he's checking things out. He's investigating. He's observing. He's listening. He's taking what he's seeing in and processing that information and trying to sort through it. This is what he's saying. So he applied his heart to know wisdom and the reason of things. He also applied his heart, it says here, to search the wisdom and the reason of things. The idea of search is that now he wasn't just taking information that came to him, he was proactively looking for things. He was going out, and almost like an explorer now, trying to take in and gather more information to make adequate conclusions and understand God's main purpose in life. And then he says to seek out. Same kind of concept, this diligent procurement of information to put together to make a conclusion. Again, he's giving us his methodology. He's giving us his credentials. And lest we think that Solomon just spent his time in church. Has anyone read the history of Solomon? I mean, that dude was not in church that much. He wasn't in the temple that much. I mean, he was. I don't want to overstate that. But the guy also knew how to do other things. And that's why he goes to this second part in verse 25. He says, not only did I search out kind of good things, wisdom and the purpose, but I also just checked out folly and foolishness and just see if there's any meaning to life in that stuff, right? It's party time is kind of the idea. And he actually says he applied his heart. I mean, imagine most people go to a party just to have fun. And this guy went like with his magnifying glass. Like he was checking it out. He was actually taking notes during parties, like trying to figure out, like, is this where the meaning of life comes from? And he says a couple of things here. He wants to apply his heart to know the wickedness of folly. He wanted to gain information and knowledge by whatever means as it related to folly. And folly, by definition, the word in the Hebrew just means stupidity, lack of understanding, What's the joke? When you're about to do something stupid, the words that precede that is, here, hold my beer, right? You'll see that sometimes on the internet. That's what he's talking about here. The stupidity, the lack of understanding that many people pursue in life. What's also interesting about the word is it's got an additional meaning in terms of how it was used. And it was having an improper trust or security in an object. We were hiking a few weeks ago, and I had this great idea. I thought it was great at the time. And there was a path. There was a well-worn path, and all my family was going on the well-worn path, and then I saw a log going across this little ravine. It wasn't deep. I mean, wasn't that folly-ish. But I saw this log going across the ravine, and I thought, man, I'm going to cut him off. I'm going to catch up. I'm going to take a little shortcut. And you already know the end of this story. The log broke, and I thought it was dry ground down there, and it wasn't. And I sank, down to my legs, probably almost, midway through my calves, muddy, soaked. And this is kind of the idea that folly presents, is that you go to step on something, and it gives way. It's not trustworthy. It's not reliable. And so what would be doubly foolish, and what many people do in life, is if I were to come around another bend and see another log, say, okay, I'm going to try it again. Boom, crash. Okay, another bend, I'm going to try this one. Boom, crash. right? And for many of us, if we're honest, that's exactly how we live our life. Let me just try it again. Maybe it'll work this time. Maybe it'll be better this time. Maybe I can pursue it this way this time. Maybe I've insulated myself enough that I can just do it this time. Maybe if I get on the treadmill, lose about 5 pounds, maybe then I can get across the log. Like, we have all of this strategy instead of just saying, you know what? I'm just going to stay on the path. I'm just going to stay on the path that God has designed for me to stay on. And so in contrast to not possessing necessary wisdom, Solomon, now he's investigating a more dangerous or wicked extreme, and that's trusting in something that you can't trust in at all. Trusting in something that can't hold you up at all. And so wisdom indeed has limitations, but Solomon's going to tell us that folly has nothing to recommend for it. You may say, well, wisdom isn't going to protect me from everything, so I'll just pursue folly. Well, he's just saying, look, wisdom's the better path. It's not going to insulate you from everything, but folly's got no chance of insulating you from anything. That's the contrast that he's going to be setting up here. You know, folly or wisdom may let you down. Sometimes folly is going to let you down all the time. And we've used this example before, but when milk is sour, you don't put it in the fridge and try it again the next day. You dump it out. You recognize it doesn't work. It's not what you need. Folly's the same way. And yet so many of us, we don't apply wisdom. It's like a new day and it's like everything's brand new. We don't see how it connected to the mistakes and the foolishness that we've been involved in before. And so we do it again and we do it again. And it's just like, oh, sour milk. Let me try it again this morning. Maybe it got better overnight, you know? I mean, that's foolish. When we use examples like that, we see. But when it comes to our life, we don't see all the time. I don't know why. I'm not pointing a finger. By the way, I'm not pointing a finger at you. I mean, they're at us, right? I mean, this is an us issue. This is a believer issue. This is an unbeliever issue. This is a mankind issue. But Solomon, so that you wouldn't have to drink sour milk all your life, is telling you that the sour milk doesn't get better. So just don't pick it up. Dump it out. This is what he's going to tell us by his investigation. He also investigated to know foolishness and madness. And it kind of sounds like he's saying the same thing here, but foolishness means a lack of wisdom, whereas madness means you're deluded or you're erratic in your behavior. So Solomon even got wild and crazy in his behavior to see if that made a difference, right? So he's just, again, giving us this emphasis of what he's done. And so he set his heart to determine if this active pursuit, which is the opposite of wisdom, was as bad as people say it was, or if it was the true pathway to life. You know, maybe people were correct. Maybe it's party all the time. That's what life's all about. And so he realizes, again, that he's not. So now we've been reminded of his methodology. Now we're going to look at his conclusions. And we're going to jump into verse 26. We see the use of the word find there. And again, I pointed that out in the introduction, but verse 26 all the way to 29, we won't get to 29 this morning, but you're going to see the word find or found 7 times in those verses. So now he's providing that conclusion. He's connecting it for us. He's putting it together. Okay, why did he go through all of this research? Well, he wants to provide a conclusion for us. In verse 26, it says this: I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters, he who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. And so it really begs the question, like, as you're just studying context, it's like, what's the connection between what we just looked at and this coming section? Like, why did he switch to a woman? Like, where's that coming from, right? So good questions to ask as you're observing the text. But as we look at the section, there's a larger subsection, 7:15, verse 7, or chapter 7, verse 15 to 8:1. And really that whole section is about human limitations involving wisdom. Okay, that's our context of this whole section. And everything in the section is dealing with that and the contrast folly. In fact, look at 8:1. What are we still talking about? We're still talking about wisdom when we get to 8:1. So we see that this little section we're about to look at is sandwiched in this section, in between wisdom and folly. So again, why does Solomon start talking about a woman here? And why does he just drop this bomb in verse 28 that just sounds like he's this misogynist, pig? I mean, like what? Where's that coming from, right? So, well, let's look why it fits. And, what we see is that the same author authored many of the Proverbs. And so what it seems like Solomon is doing, again, taking this into context, is that Solomon is building his case against folly and foolishness while at the same time recognizing the limitations of wisdom. And so what we see in Proverbs is some similar wording where he personifies the way of folly through an immoral woman. Okay, so I believe that's what he's doing here. He's personifying the way of folly through an immoral woman, just like he did in Proverbs. And you've got some verses there that we can look at another time, or you can write down and check out on your own time. So one of the things we've got to understand about folly before we kind of start breaking this down a little bit is folly is not just simple ignorance of a topic. That's ignorant. Like, it's interesting because ignorant is kind of taken, that's a put down, right? If I call someone ignorant, I just roasted them, or I did something that would harm them. Ignorant, it's not always a put down. Ignorant could just be stating the facts. Ignorant just means you don't know, right? You just haven't heard, you don't know. Folly is not ignorance. Folly is not just not knowing. It's volitional, active rejection of true wisdom. That's what folly is. It's volitional rejection of true wisdom. And again, true wisdom comes how? We learn it in the book of Proverbs. It's through the fear of the Lord. It's through walking by faith. It's through relating to the Lord day by day, moment in our Christian lives. That's how true wisdom comes. And what you're going to find is when people engage in folly, they actively reject true wisdom. It binds up their mental state, and it binds them in a way a physical chain would bind the body. It enslaves them. Now that should sound familiar for those that went through a Roman study. What does the sin nature do? It wants to enslave you. And does it want to treat you well? No. It wants you to do evil, wicked things. It wants you to be ineffective for the Lord. It wants to dominate you. It wants to cause death in your life, not just physical death. It wants to cause death in relationships. It wants to cause death in your emotions. It wants you to wake up and you're irritated and agitated and you don't know why. And you're miserable. That's what sin wants to do to you. That's what the selection of folly will do to you. And so he's going to use this woman as an analogy, personifying this way of folly. And what does he say about the woman? Well, he says this: I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. Wow, bitter. Bitter than, not just bitter, more bitter than death. Very, very strong language here. She's more bitter than death. And you know why I think he's saying she's more bitter than death? Because this woman personifying this way, is a living kind of death. In other words, you keep living this death-like existence. This is death by 1,000 paper cuts. This is people living life, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every pursuit of folly will produce painful consequences. When we think we're getting away with sin, it may feel like that, but there's always a consequence. Sin always gives birth to death. Always. That's what the New Testament teaches. There's no getting out of that. There's no neutral in the Christian life. You're either walking by means of the Spirit or you're walking according to the flesh, and the flesh only knows to do one thing. It produces acts of sin, thoughts of sin in your life, and it's going to produce death. And that's when life really stinks. That's when we're most miserable. That's when things don't go the way we want. And this is why he says that this woman is more bitter than death itself. See, physical death ends life. It ends suffering in this world. This type of pursuit of folly is like you signing up for torture. Do you want to go to summer camp or Guantanamo Bay camp, right? Seriously. And it's like we don't think of the consequences. We just think, well, I'm just going to pursue folly. I'm just going to have fun. And it's not that God doesn't want you to have fun. He wants you to have true fun, true joy, true pleasure. And see, we get caught up thinking that the world, the flesh, the side of the eyes, that can provide the lasting pleasure, and it doesn't provide it. In fact, it just gives you another paper cut. It just puts you in a torture chamber in life. And this is what he's talking about here. This type of woman, this type of way is more bitter than death. In fact, this woman, her way is described in two ways here in verse 26. We see it says her heart is snares and nets. And again, both of these descriptions are the means by which someone traps or secures their prey. We see snares referring to a trapping element that hunters use on land. We see nets, or a trapping element that fishermen use in water. Notice too that the text tells us that her heart is these things. The way of folly just does this to us. That's how it operates. It's not like it operates that way some of the times. This is the very heart of folly, will end us up in this type of enslavement. And so we see foolishness and folly and carnality. They always promise more than it can deliver. Those of you that have been believers for more than 5 or 10 years, can you, just internally say amen to that? Have we realized that folly and carnality and foolishness always promises more than it delivers? We know that to be true, don't we? I think we do. Hopefully we understand that. The sin nature says, you know what? Go after that pleasure, but let me just warn you that when you do that, I'm going to entrap you and enslave you, and you're not going to be able to stop doing that for many years. But go ahead. It doesn't say that. It's like, go get it. Go do it. Make it happen. It's going to make you feel good. It's going to be great to tell my boss off and just get that off my chest. You're going to feel so much better about it. Until your unemployment runs out from when you got fired by what you said to your boss, and it runs out, and now you lose your house and you lose your car. A country song, basically. Your dog is dead. All that kind of stuff. The sin nature never tells you that. It just says, go get it. Get it off your chest. Tell them how you feel, right? All of these things, we don't understand. It never tells you. It's always more alluring. It always wants to suck you in. It's like, I don't know if this friend exists for everybody in high school, but I had a friend that no matter what I did with him, I always got in trouble. Do you have a friend like that? That's like your sin nature, right? Every time, we would do something wrong, and I'd be like, oh, we're caught. I'd look around, my friend was gone, I'm holding the bag, right? The old adage, I'm the one holding the bag. Somehow my friend would weasel his way out of the consequences. I'd get stuck with him. It would happen all the time. Now, I wasn't an angel, so I did some things I probably got away with that I should have deserved to get caught for. But the point is this, that's what exactly the sin nature does. It emphasizes temporary benefits while hiding the long-term effects and consequences. That's what sin does. That's what folly does. That's why he uses this illustration to tell us that folly, this way, this woman, again, just personifying this way, is going to trap you. It's going to ensnare you. It's going to enslave you. Is it worth it? The good news, it's good news, bad news, but it's good news. You know that God is going to give you the choice to make those decisions for yourself. He's a gentleman. He's going to let you choose. But the consequences have been determined. So when you choose folly, consequences come with that. When you choose the way of life, when you choose to walk in the fear of the Lord, there's consequences with that, good consequences. So when you choose folly, you're choosing pain, you're choosing bitterness, you're choosing broken relationships, you're choosing emotional distress. And if you want that way, we've got a sign-up sheet back in the foyer. You can sign your name to that way. Of course, no one would sign that sheet. No one wants that kind of life. The way of life is happiness and peace and in healthy relationships. That's what walking in the fear of the Lord is. That's what's walking in true wisdom is. And Solomon is giving us his conclusions. Guys, don't go the way of folly. It's just going to ensnare you. It's going to entrap you. I've investigated it all. I've figured it out. I've put it together. This is my conclusion. The second thing is very similar. It calls this way, or this woman, her hands are like fetters. They're bindings, they're chains, they're shackles, something that continues to restrict. So it's not just a momentary enslavement, it's an ongoing enslavement. You might say she gets her hooks into you and she doesn't let go. That's kind of the idea of this way of folly. But then he goes on to say, but he who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. And so now Solomon is going to describe two types of people in their interaction with this woman or this way. And the one who pleases God, let's look at this person first. And this refers to the man who walks in the fear of the Lord. This is the one who doesn't just pursue wisdom, but he pursues wisdom while living in dependence on the Lord. Pursuing wisdom by taking into account divine perspective as he interacts with things going on in his life. This is one who walks by faith. This is the one who walks with divine perspective. This type of man will escape consistently from this type of woman or way. Now, one of the things that we learn in the scriptures, it's not that this man will never fall prey to this woman. It's not that he's going to be perfect and sinless, but the point is this, that as he walks with the Lord, he's going to escape from her. He's going to escape from folly and the consequences that come with folly. In fact, it kind of reminds me of Galatians 5:16. Those of you may have this memorized, but I say then, walk in the Spirit, you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. And for many people, their Christian life, they take that verse and they invert it. There's one command in this verse, and it's walk in the Spirit. And when you walk in the Spirit, that verb there, or that phrase, shall not fulfill, it's a double negation in the Greek, which means never, no, not ever. So many people, they take that verse and they say, you know what? I got to stop walking in the lust of the flesh so that I can walk in the Spirit. And you see how that's inverted from what this verse is saying. You have to be spiritual to obey, not obey to be spiritual. You've got to walk by means of the Spirit, and then that will take care of you fulfilling the lust of the flesh. Why? Because the Spirit of God is controlling you. The Spirit of God is holding your sin nature at bay. The Spirit of God is delivering you from sin's power. When you and I try to live life delivering ourselves from the lust of the flesh, we have no power. We have no stability. We have no consistency to do that. Only the Spirit of God is equipped to do that. And if you don't believe me, again, go back to Romans chapter 7. You've got a believer with a new nature, understands the law of God, has the desire to stop sinning, and can't figure it out. And we've looked at that before. Romans 7, 14 through 25. He mentions I, me, my, first person personal pronouns over 40 times in that section. Guess who's not mentioned in that section? The Spirit of God. And it's not until Romans 8 that he brings the Spirit of God into the equation, and guess what? He realizes deliverance. Because he can't do it himself. We can't do it ourselves. And the one who pleases God in this passage is somebody that walks by faith and allows God to deliver them from sin's power. It allows God to deliver them from the way of folly. But in contrast, the sinner shall be trapped by her. In other words, this type of man pursues this type of woman or way because he's not walking in the fear of the Lord. He's walking according to his own desires. He believes what the sin nature is communicating to him. Yeah, this will feel good. This will be good. This will work. Go this route. Forget about God. You got to take care of number one. You got to do these things. And he believes these types of things. So even though, this person may know better, this person may have heard a sermon on wisdom and folly, right? May have heard the teaching, may believe the teaching, may have been burnt in the past. He foolishly thinks the next time it could be different. Well, maybe it'll be different this time. Let me give it a shot. Maybe this time I'll truly find pleasure. Maybe this time I'll truly find happiness. The last Cadillac I bought, I had buyer's remorse through, but maybe this Cadillac will give me true happiness. Maybe this boat, that was just a pontoon boat. This thing, good night. It is big, it's fast, wow. Maybe that will make me happy. See, it's always the next thing. That's the choices that folly kind of lead us into. And so this type of man, this type of person will be trapped by this way consistently. And again, this could refer to a believer, an unbeliever, or a carnal believer, because both of those categories of people are capable of being dominated by the source of sin. Now, as we go into verses 27 and 28 here to close out this morning, we're going to see Solomon just being very raw and unfiltered. You know, and I don't know, I just like the way that Solomon can just kind of get to the point. He speaks things that are true, and oftentimes it makes us uncomfortable with the way that he words things. At least I feel that way. Like there'll be times like just in my study of Ecclesiastes, I'll be reading and I just like got to get up from my chair and be like, what in the world? Like, what am I going to say about that? Like, I wish that wasn't there, right? It's just a little too real. It's a little too much like coming straight out of his gut. And you know, one of the things I do love and appreciate, although it makes life a little bit more difficult for me, is Solomon's brutally honest, and he just lays it out. If he shakes things up, he shakes it up. He's okay with that. And so what a transition to verse 27 and 28. So let's look at verses 27. I'm going to break this up. We're going to cover the first part of verse 28 with 27. And so let's read that, verse 27 through 28a. Here's what I found, says the preacher. Again, he's referring to himself there. Adding one thing to the other to find out the reason, which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. And I don't know if you picked that up, but is it ironic that he says he found something, only then to say that he hasn't found anything? Did you pick that up? Look at the beginning of verse 27. Here's what I found. Look at the end of 28a, but I can't find. Here's what I found, but I didn't find anything. You know, it's just an interesting thing that he says here. And so even by adding one thing to another, in other words, he's going back to his investigation now. He's added this pursuit of wisdom, this pursuit of folly. He's put all that together at the same time. And what he's saying is he still didn't get to the bottom of the matter. He's found something, but he didn't find the whole thing. I think that's his point. He's learned some things, but he hasn't learned the whole thing, if you want to put it that way. And again, this word reason is the same word we've been looking at. It's God's grand plan for life under the sun. It's his bottom line, the sum of all things. This is, again, what Solomon was after in this passage. He's trying to get this reason, this grand scheme of things, and it's like a mist. That's why he always uses the word vanity. He's trying to grab fog, right, and put this together and organize it, and he can't quite get it. And he says his soul still seeks, but he cannot find. Again, as Solomon even writes this in his old age, he's still diligently, aggressively looking for this bottom line. And again, notice it's his soul seeking. And just shows us how important this is to Solomon. And it's clear from his statement in his intense pursuit that he's come up somewhat empty-handed in terms of making that final conclusion that he has wanted to make. And so let's jump now into the second part of verse 28. And it begs the question, is Solomon anti-women? I mean, it kind of seems that way. You know, verse 28, one man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. I've actually heard people quote this verse and say, well, you know, that's good for my daughters. I mean, maybe they'll find one guy. I mean, at least there's one guy in 1,000, but my sons, oh man, they're never going to find a woman, according to this verse. And I've heard people actually quote it that way, which is, unbelievable. But Solomon is going to continue here, and this is why I think the context is so important. He's using metaphoric language. Okay, he's illustrating these concepts, and I think he's exaggerating for emphasis. And what is he exaggerating? Well, let's kind of keep working our way contextually. Remember, the woman in this instance refers to the way of folly. Okay, the way of folly, the way of foolishness. The man, in this sense, refers to wisdom. Okay, so again, he's using this personification to communicate these points. I think we have, a good argument that that's what he's doing based on his other writing in Proverbs, that he's done this before. And because of this, the man refers to the one who pleases God from verse 26. The woman refers to the sinner in verse 26. So she's all associated with the way of folly, okay, and the result of people choosing that way. So before we think that he's misogynistic, anti-women, remember that in Proverbs, again, not to defend Solomon, I mean, he's got a lot of problems, but to defend the use of his analogy here, in Proverbs, he used a woman to personify both wisdom and folly. Not just folly. He used a woman to personify both of those concepts. But remember, I think, and this is the point, what is Solomon trying to find in this passage? That's what we want to go back to. What's he trying to find? Well, he's not trying to find wise men and wise women. That's not the concept here. He's trying to find the reason. He's trying to find the bottom line, the divine grand plan of life. That's what he's trying to find. And this is how Solomon used a similar analogy in Proverbs 2-9. It was Lady Wisdom versus Madam Folly, right? He's got these contrasting women representing these two ways. So he's not trying to find a wise woman for my son to marry, and good luck to him. He's not going to find one. My daughters are better shape. Maybe there's one guy out there. That's not what the concept is at all. He's trying to find the reason, the grand scheme, divine plan, bottom line of life. And so his comment is designed to show us how utterly scarce and rare it is to find someone who fears the Lord. In fact, when he looked across the entire human race, it was a very rare thing to find a wise person who was consistently pursuing relationship in fear of the Lord. It was very rare to find. But you know what it wasn't rare to find? Somebody that was caught in the traps of folly. In fact, he said, I don't know of anyone that hasn't been caught in the traps of folly. That's kind of, to me, the summary of the section. And so one man among 1,000 I have found. It's a Hebrew idiom akin to our phrase in 1 in a million. In other words, it's rare to find someone who's pursuing wisdom consistently. That's the deal. And somebody who's walking in the fear of the Lord consistently. And so even though he's searched wisdom, he's looked at it from every angle, one of the problems is he's never seen a consistent enough example to understand the outcome of that living. Because typically people slip up, they're enslaved at some point, and there's outcome for that. So he's never even seen an example that somebody has just lived consistently all throughout their life. Even so, Solomon would say this would be his conclusion. Pursuing wisdom, definitely better track though. At least you got a chance. Folly, you got no chance. Wisdom may not provide all the answers, but folly doesn't provide one answer. And that's kind of the idea. And so that last phrase, but a woman among all these I have not found. Again, pursuing folly, pursuing a woman this way, if you will, did not net any results in the search for the reason or big picture purpose of life. Again, the folly road is not helpful at all. And so I think the encouragement as we close out here is even though wisdom has human limitations, it's still the better path over and above folly. And so let's just close there with a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for your word, and Lord, now the hard part ensues for each one of us as we go out and seek to live the truth and the applications that you made to each person individually this morning. Lord, we know that if you are working in our hearts and convincing us of certain truth, that we need to respond by faith. We need to rely upon you in order to execute what you're convincing us of. And so may we also be not only persuaded of the truth, but also persuaded of the method by which we pursue fulfilling that truth. And that is independence on you, relying on your resources. So give us wisdom, Lord. That is one area we need wisdom in, areas that we are lacking and failing, and realize what the answer is, but have not quite gotten there. We need wisdom to know how to apply your resources and to tap into your strength. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.